the individual's entry into the FBI's National Instant Criminal Background Check System, or NICS, as a prohibited person who is federally barred from possessing a firearm. Without more information before this committee regarding these forms, it's difficult to take a position on the resolution. There may be legitimate reasons to look into this issue. However, it's worth noting that this committee has had several hearings and markups on firearms-related issues, and the minority has not raised a single issue or asked any questions about NICS self-submission forms. Moreover, the resolution requests records that date back to 3 different presidential administrations with 4 different attorneys general, suggesting that time is not of the essence here. My colleagues across the aisle can easily request this information directly from the Department of Justice Office of Legislative Affairs rather than through a formal resolution of inquiry. And of course, the 118th Congress is just a few short weeks away when they will have the majority in the House. Because I believe that a resolution of inquiry is not the best vehicle for obtaining this information, particularly in the waning days of this Congress, I urge the committee to report the resolution with no recommendation. I now recognize Mr. Bishop on behalf of the ranking member of the Judiciary Committee for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And it's interesting this arises immediately after the bill we just finished because they are connected in a way. Mr. Chairman, between 2016 and 2019, the FBI created and utilized what they called a NICS indices self-submission form. As the name of the form suggests, the form allowed people to self-submit to NICS. By signing this form, these people relinquished their right to purchase or possess a firearm and authorized the disclosure of personal health information to the FBI. According to documents received through FOIA requests, the FBI utilized these self-submission forms on at least 15 occasions. On these occasions, armed FBI agents presented these forms to individuals, which raises the concern that the forms may have been signed under duress. Legitimate questions exist about whether these forms were signed under duress, thereby depriving individuals of their Second Amendment rights without due process. While use of the forms has been allegedly discontinued, it raises serious concerns that the FBI would undertake such actions to deprive Americans of their Second Amendment rights without congressional authorization or due process. I applaud our colleague, Congressman Clyde, for pursuing this serious issue. Republicans are committed to holding the FBI accountable for its conduct when we assume the majority in 4 weeks. I yield back.
Without objection, all other opening statements will be included in the record. I now recognize myself for purposes of offering an amendment in the nature of a substitute. The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to HRS 1477, offered by Mr. Nadler of New York. Strike all after the resolving clause and insert the following: that Attorney General Merrick Garland is requested to furnish to the House of Representatives not later than 14 days.
Without objection, the amendment in the nature of a substitute will be considered as read and shall be considered as base text for purposes of amendment. I will now recognize myself to explain the amendment. This amendment in the nature of a substitute makes a single technical change to the resolution of inquiry by identifying Attorney General Merrick Garland by name. No other changes were made to the resolution. I urge all members to support the amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time. Are there any other amendments to the amendment in the nature of a substitute?
I move to strike the last word.
The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized for 5 minutes.
I agree with Mr. Bishop on this. This is very timely. And I hope the other side of the aisle will read one of these NICS indices self-submission form. It's actually a form you fill out if, and I'm going to read it to you, if you have a mental health condition that may cause you, check all that apply, to 1, be in danger of myself or others, 2, lack mental capacity adequately to contract or manage the details of my life. And then the second part of the form involves verification of physician or mental health professional. What we're looking at is evidence that the FBI went ahead and wrote some laws and implemented.
The gentleman will suspend. The committee is not in order. The gentleman deserves to be heard. You may proceed.
Appreciate the chairman. What we're looking at is evidence that the FBI went off on their own and wrote the bill and implemented the bill that you all are trying to pass here today, or did pass, and will try to pass on the floor. It's exactly what you're trying to do. But the problem is, that's the executive branch. They don't have this authority. this inquiry would hopefully lead us to understand why they think they're the legislative branch. And also, maybe it would help us understand what sort of implementing language they think we gave them that enabled them to create this form that allows somebody to submit themselves to the NICS database because they believe they're a danger to themselves or others. Precisely what you were trying to legislate, they have done without you. And so I hope the other side of the aisle, for no other reason than intellectual legislative curiosity, would join us in requesting this information from the executive branch, the administrative branch, the branch of government which has no authority to do this. And it also, surrounding our inquiry, are the issues that we raised in the debate on the previous bill, which is, were they coerced? Was somebody pressured? Did the FBI say, you know, we're thinking about investigating you, or we're thinking about prosecuting you, but if you fill out this form, it'll all be good? Or did somebody say, I've got a program here, I've got some inducement, some disability benefit that I would love for you to receive, but I just don't think you're mentally capable, you don't manage your own finances. If you just kindly fill out this form and give up your God-given right to defend yourself, we'll get you that money. We need to know how these, first of all, what led the FBI to believe they have this power. Clearly, this whole committee is I believe, is unanimous here in agreeing that they don't have this power. And also, how did they wield this power, and what was their intent when they did? Because if the bill that just passed this committee that's going to go to the floor gets implemented, I'd like to know how they're going to implement it. They've already done it once without us. So let's find out. And I'll yield to Mr. Bishop.
Yield.
Yes.
Maybe they did it because they didn't think that Congress could express in clear language what the Congress intended to do.
Well, it is clear. The implementation is clear here. It's not clear, though, how you ever got your name off this list once you got on this list. And if the FBI once believed they had the power to do this, they must certainly believe they still have the power to do this. And they clearly do not, or we wouldn't have been debating and amending that bill for over an hour in our committee just now. So I urge adoption of this resolution of inquiry. And I want to thank Representative Andrew Clyde from Georgia for offering it. I did not know this issue existed. It really kind of blows my mind to see that the FBI went forward and created this on their own out of whole cloth with no legislative underpinning, and it deserves to be checked, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Does anyone else seek recognition? All right, a recording quorum being... That's what I'm about to do. The question occurs then on the amendment in the nature of a substitute. This will be followed immediately by a vote reporting the resolution. All those in favor respond by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment in the nature of a substitute is agreed to.
I request a recorded vote.
No,
Okay,
next
I'm
thing.
sorry, A&S.
A reporting quorum being present, the question is on the motion to report the resolution H-Res 1477 as amended without recommendation to the House. Those in favor respond by saying aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The resolution is ordered reported without recommendation.
Mr. Chairman, at this point, I would like to request...
I have very good hearing. I'm
good.
certain I heard that. A recording vote has been requested, and the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Nadler. Ms. Lofgren.
Aye.
Ms. Lofgren votes aye. Ms. Jackson-Lee. Mr. Cohen. Mr. Johnson of Georgia.
Aye.
Mr. Johnson of Georgia votes aye. Ms. Bass.
Bass votes aye.
Ms. Bass
Right.
votes aye. Mr. Jeffries. Mr. Cicilline.
Aye.
Mr. Cicilline votes aye. Mr. Swalwell, Mr. Liu,
Aye.
Mr. Liu votes aye. Mr. Raskin,
Aye.
Mr. Raskin votes aye. Ms. Dryapal,
Aye.
Ms. Dryapal votes aye. Ms. Stimmings, Ms. Stimmings votes aye. Mr. Correa,
Aye.
Mr. Correa votes aye. Ms. Scanlon, Ms. Scanlon votes aye. Ms. Garcia, Ms. Garcia votes aye. Mr. Neguse,
Aye.
Mr. Neguse votes aye. Ms. McBath, Ms. McBath votes aye. Mr. Stanton, Mr. Stanton,
Aye.
Mr. Stanton votes aye. Ms. Dean,
Aye.
Ms. Dean votes aye. Ms. Escobar,
Aye.
Ms. Escobar votes aye. Mr. Jones,
Aye.
Mr. Jones votes aye. Ms. Ross,
Ross votes aye.
Ms. Ross votes aye. Ms. Bush,
Bush votes aye.
Ms. Bush votes aye. Mr. Jordan, Mr. Shabbat, Mr. Gomert, Mr. Isa, Mr. Isa votes no. Mr. Buck, Mr. Buck votes no. Mr. Gates, Mr. Gates votes no. Mr. Johnson, Louisiana, Mr. Johnson, Louisiana votes no. Mr. Biggs, Mr. Biggs votes no. Mr. McClintock, Mr. McClintock votes no. Mr. Stubbe, Mr. Tiffany,
Tiffany, no.
Mr. Tiffany votes no. Mr. Massie, Mr. Massie votes no. Mr. Roy, Mr. Bishop, Mr. Bishop votes no. Ms. Fishbach, Ms. Fishbach votes no. Ms. Sparts, Mr. Fitzgerald, Mr. Fitzgerald votes no. Mr. Benz, Mr. Benz votes no. Mr. Owens, Mr. Owens votes no.
Mr. Shabbat?
Mr. Shabbat votes no.
Mr. Nadler?
Mr. Nadler votes yes.
Has every member voted who wishes to vote?
Ms. Jackson Lee votes yes.
The clerk will report.
Mr. Chairman, there are 21 ayes and 14 noes.
The ayes have it. The resolution as amended is ordered, reported without recommendation to the House. Members will have 2 days to submit views. Without objection, the resolution will be reported as a single amendment in the nature of a substitute, incorporating all adopted amendments, and staff is authorized to make technical and conforming changes.
Pursuant to notice, I now call up HRES 1478, calling for the submission to the House of Representatives certain information regarding the decision of the President of the United States to institute the ghost gun rule for purposes of markup, and move that the committee report the resolution without recommendation to the House. The clerk will report the resolution.
HRS 1478, calling for the submission to the House of Representatives of certain information regarding the decision of the President of the United States to institute the ghost gun rule.
Without objection, the resolution is considered as read and open for amendment at any point. I'll begin by recognizing myself for an opening statement. Ghost guns are firearms constructed with component parts that can be obtained anonymously without a background check and which lack serial numbers. Most ghost guns are assembled from parts or kits. These kits, available at in-person stores and online, contain all the parts needed to assemble a firearm, including unfinished receivers, tools, and step-by-step instructions. Since ghost guns are devoid of serial numbers and other identifying marks, they're not traceable by law enforcement, making them the perfect weapon for would-be criminals. Ghost guns have been linked nationwide to homicides, suicides, mass shootings, robberies, shooting deaths of law enforcement officers, and domestic violence. From January 2016 through December 2021, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives received reports of more than 45,000 ghost guns recovered from crime scenes, including nearly 700 from homicide investigations. Without the ability to trace these guns, far too many crimes go unsolved, and the people who committed them remain free to harm our communities again. In May 2021, ATF announced that it would seek to update firearms regulations to address the proliferation of ghost guns, an essential measure to protect public safety. On April 11, 2022, Attorney General Garland signed the final rule, which mandates serialization and background checks for certain gun kits and requires the serialization of some existing ghost guns. HRES 1478, a resolution of inquiry introduced by Representative Andrew Clyde, calls for the submission to the House of Representatives of certain information regarding the decision of the President of the United States to institute the ghost gun rule. The resolution requests the President to furnish to the House not later than 14 days after its adoption a copy of any documents, records, reports, memos, correspondence, or other communication, either generated or received by the Office of the President, that refers to or relates to the decision of or the reasoning used by the President to institute the ATF ghost gun rule. This resolution of inquiry comes in at the very end of the 117th Congress and well after the ghost gun rule was finalized. It's also directed to the President rather than to the Attorney General, who might be the more appropriate party for this request. I would note that the Ranking Member Jordan sent a letter to the ATF on November 3rd, just over a month ago, seeking various information from the ATF. In part, this letter follows up on a letter sent by Mr. Biggs in August of last year, which requested information about the ATF's proposed ghost gun rule after it was announced, but well before it was finalized. Ranking Member Jordan's recent letter acknowledges that the ATF responded to the 2021 letter, but now states, 16 months after that first inquiry, that the response was insufficient. ATF should be given time to respond to this revived inquiry, and indeed they've already committed to responding. If they do not respond, Ranking Member Jordan has said he intends to follow up in the 118th Congress. Given this recent request and ATF's commitment to respond, this resolution is unnecessary. Accordingly, I urge the committee to report the resolution with no recommendation. I would also urge the committee and all of our colleagues to be serious about the threat that ghost guns pose to our communities. It's certainly number one on the to-do list for all of the law enforcement, federal, state, and local, that we talk to regularly in my district. I now recognize the Ranking Member of the Judiciary Committee. Actually, I recognize Mr. Bishop for his opening statement.
I thank you, Madam Chairman, and on behalf of the Ranking Member, Mr. Massie was just pointing out in the case of the FBI and the NICS indices self-submission form that the FBI essentially implemented a law that hadn't been passed until today. It's been passed through this markup. Well, in this case, we have the ATF with the so-called ghost gun rule is a clear example of another federal agency far exceeding its authority in law. The rule goes well beyond the authority granted to the agency in any federal statute. The rule unlawfully expands the definition of a, quote, firearm to include, quote, a weapon parts kit. However, when passing the Gun Control Act in 1968, Congress provided a specific definition for a firearm, and it did not include weapon parts kits. In other words, the ATF took it upon itself to redefine and expand the meaning of firearm, even though Congress had explicitly chosen to define the term with precision in the statute. In addition, the ATF rule inserted a new definition of, quote, frame or receiver, using language from the Federal Firearms Act of 1938, a law that Congress repealed when it passed the Gun Control Act of 1968. By doing so, ATF completely disregarded Congress's express intent in that repeal. The rule also requires federal firearms licensees to retain firearm transaction records indefinitely, despite current regulations that allow an FFL to destroy these records after 20 years. According to ATF data, even data of the ATF, the statistical average time to crime following a firearm purchase is about 7 years. Requiring FFLs to keep firearm transaction records indefinitely doesn't strike the right balance here on the burden to FFLs and the need to stop crime. During the 90-day comment period on this rule, ATF received over 290,000 comments. We understand that this was the largest number of comments on a rule in Justice Department history. Almost all of the public comments were in opposition to the ATF's rule, but the Biden administration finalized it anyway. Committee Republicans have now sent 3 separate letters to ATF requesting information about this rule, and to date have received only a half-page response. This is unacceptable. We need answers, and we will get them. I commend Mr. Clyde for championing this issue, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Without objection, all other opening statements will be included in the record. I now recognize myself for purposes of offering an amendment in the nature of a substitute. The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to HRS 14.
Without objection, the amendment in the nature of a substitute will be considered as read and shall be considered as base text for purposes of amendment. I will recognize myself to explain the amendment. This amendment in the nature of a substitute makes a single technical change to the resolution of inquiry by identifying President Biden by name. No other changes were made to the resolution. I urge all members to support the amendment. I yield back the balance of my time. Are there any amendments to the amendment in the nature of a substitute? If no one seeks recognition, for what purpose does the gentlelady from Texas seek recognition?
Strike the last word.
Use your mic. Gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Statistics show that much of the recent so-called crime wave involves firearms, which have been a pervasive problem in America long before the COVID-19 era. The average year, guns account for roughly 2/3 of homicides. However, in 2020, 77% of murders involved firearms. Today, more people are carrying guns in America, legally and illegally, than ever. More guns lead to more shootings. In my state, it's a holiday for gun shootings because of the open carry, permitless open carry bill, no waiting periods, absolutely nothing to stop juveniles, persons coming from North Texas to kill in El Paso, or to kill neighbors, young man killing in Uvalde. It is absurd. And now law enforcement must also contend with untraceable ghost guns, which are perfect for committing crimes like the gun an assailant made with a 3D printer and then used to shoot 3 Houston police officers in January of this year, while I watched in my congressional district a regular shootout with the criminal, the perpetrator, shooting at police, running through the streets, and the police running after them, and they using a ghost gun. Oh, how absurd this is. I visited those police officers in the hospital. Their recovery was not overnight. It was weeks and months. Their families had to deal with these injuries. Ghost guns are an unserialized and untraceable firearms that can be brought online and assembled at home, and rather than by a federally licensed manufacturer and importer of firearms. Absolutely disgraceful. These weapons are often marketed as ghost gun kits, which include all the parts and equipment necessary to build these weapons at home. These kits are widely available and can be purchased. The rule issued by ATF was a result of a year-long serious work. Additionally, ATF officials should be allowed to respond to the inquiry that has already been addressed, and I urge the committee to report the resolution with no recommendation, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Who else seeks recognition? In that case, the question occurs on the amendment in nature of a substitute. This will be followed immediately by a vote on reporting the resolution. All those in favor respond by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment in nature of a substitute is agreed to. Reporting quorum being present, the question is on the motion to report the resolution HRES 1478 as amended without recommendation to the House. Those in favor respond by saying aye. Those opposed, no. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the resolution is ordered reported without recommendation to the House. Members will have 2 days to submit views. Without objection, the resolution will be reported as a single amendment in nature of a substitute incorporating all adopted amendments, and staff is authorized to make technical and conforming changes. Okay. Committee will suspend for a moment. The committee will stand in a brief recess until further notice.